So this scene, I photographed this from Lake Tahoe several years ago, and I just really like the scene, and I painted this picture from it. See the easiest way to do that. I'll show my paintings afterwards, actually. We'll do it that way. So there's a lot that I like in this scene. There's a lot of different elements that, from sky, water reflections, trees, the building, the docks. You've got perspective. There's aerial perspective, linear perspective. You've got some organic shapes. Organic shapes are fun and easy to paint typically because they're unlike a building or a car. It's you can sort of let loose with it. You don't have to paint it exactly like you see it in your photo or exactly like it is in real life, because nobody's going to be standing next to you and looking at your painting and saying that's not that exact tree. Whereas if you want to paint a certain car or building or person, you really want to try and make it look like what you're painting. But with this, we have pretty much free will with the sky, the water reflections, the trees, the mountains. We can shape them however we want, scale them however we want. So in this scene, everything is pretty much right in the middle. Horizontally right through the photo, which is not a great composition. So in this one here, I zoomed in because for me, the focal point is the boathouse on the dock. I like that contrast of the sort of the man-made structure with the natural water, trees and mountains. And so that's what I'm zoomed in to focus on that. And I still have the elements that I like. I've got the sky, the mountains, the trees, the dock, the building, and the water and reflections. Everything's still there, but I'm just focusing more in on what the focal point is. Can you hear me okay back there? Is that okay? Great. Thank you. And so you're familiar probably with the rule of thirds. And so what I've done here is I've gridded out what the thirds would look like if you actually put lines on. And you can see the building, the focal point is in one of those interesting areas down in the lower third. And then in this one, I just put center lines because you also want to keep things, usually a good rule of thumb is to keep things away from their center lines. So the middle line right through the middle, the mountains go above it, the trees go above it. There's nothing that's really resting right on that line. And then same with the vertical center line. There's nothing that is drawing your eye right to the middle of the painting or the scene. In this one here, I dropped the scene down, which creates more sky. And when you have sort of a lot of sky in your painting, it's nice to have something of interest there. But if your focal point isn't the sky, you don't want too much there because you don't want it to be confusing. You don't want it to be too distracting from your focal point. So something subtle, little clouds, but nothing that's too distracting. And in this one, I raised the focal point up. So the horizon line is closer to the top third versus the bottom third of the scene, which is, again, just a more pleasing composition. But what happens here is you lose the sky and you gain the water in the foreground. So no interest in the sky because there's not much room to play with there. You're going to put the interest instead in the foreground and the water. And so here's the first wash that I did. Yep. Yes.
You shortened it up too.
I did. There's the photo. What I did was I cropped in.
It's really long.
Yep. Yeah. So it goes. I mean, when you're looking at that dock, it goes forever. It's really crazy. But it's so wide, and I'll show you here in my examples. And actually, let me do that first. Let me back. Stop that. And then I'm gonna. All right. And so several years ago, this is what I painted.
Yeah. Nice.
It was kind of my interpretation of that scene. And so you can tell I kept the very long dock all the way to the land, but it has all the elements in it: water, some reflections, mountains, sky, tree. I did this all wet and wet. So the sky, trees, the water, pretty much painted all at the same time. And then I went in after, and you can kind of tell I went in too soon. You can see those blooms in the sky. I painted the mountains in before it was totally dry. But when I say that you get a lot of nice things happening when you let watercolor paint itself, when those blossoms happened, I just thought it looked like clouds. So it fit the scene for me. It didn't distract. It's not too much going on in the sky. It just sort of worked. And I didn't intend for that to happen, but it's one of those happy accidents. You'll see that the closest mountain is darkest because that's going to have more value to it, and it's going to get lighter as they go back. Obviously, the contrast exists in the building here, the dark against the light, with some visual interest in different areas. And then in preparations for the class, I painted this one as the example with the focal point horizon down the lower third. So a little bit of interest in the sky, not so much that it's distracting, but there's just a little bit of interest there. And then a little bit of interest in the water, but the focal point being this, sort of the supporting cast here. The scene is set with the mountains and the water. So that was a version with that other composition. And then this one is focusing or letting all the fun happen in the water here. So still a little bit of interest in the sky. Again, I timed it right or wrong, I guess. Got a little bit of a bloom happening here, but it works. It gives me a little bit of cloud shape, a little texture in the sky, but it's not too much. I painted the mountains in wet and wet. So when I painted the sky, I painted the mountains almost right away. And then a light value in the water. You can tell I painted the trees. I just put the light values of the trees, and that, I wish it could be easier to go back and forth, but you can see one of the interesting things that happened here is I used undersea green, which I love the color. When you paint with undersea green wet and wet, there's nickel azo yellow in it. And that nickel azo yellow, as soon as it finds water, it wants to run for the hills. So it just separated itself. So now I know when I paint this again, I'm not going to paint these trees wet and wet. I'll just paint the sky, the mountains, the water, and maybe some reflection here because I want that soft. And that'll be it. That'll be the first wash. And so I'll go back here and share. And so this one here, this is my first wash of this larger painting here. And so you can see I put the trees in the background on the right-hand side in while it was wet, so it makes it soft. I'm not going to do that again because I know that color it separates in a good way. But I don't need those trees to be soft. So I'm going to let the reflections, I'll put some reflections in, let them be soft. And then these streaks in the water, those sort of ripples, the directionals that lead you into the scene in the bottom part. I will probably I may put some in there, but the water is going to be multiple layers. So when you're painting reflections like this, it's easier to do a base layer, lightest value, let that dry, or if you can go in and add some darker colors while it's wet, let it dry, maybe do another layer showing some tree reflections. You can add some reflections from the building at the same time, but it's easier to work in layers like that than trying to do it all at the same time because they'll just get muddy and blend together, whereas some of these want some separation and some definition. For that reason, and also these other steps here. So this was the second stage, painted the trees in. You can tell I went very light on some of the deciduous trees versus evergreen trees. Put a little more definition in the water. I put some sparkle in there with some dry brush. I put some warmth that's reflecting from what's in the sky. There's a little bit of carmine red that I used with the brighter blue in the sky. But really the point was to try and create some ripples in the water that will lead your eye into the scene. And I don't know if anybody, are you all familiar with the golden spiral, Fibonacci spiral? You've heard of that? Mm-hmm. There's it's actually on my shirt here. I'll send a link out that kind of goes in the description of that, but it's sort of a mathematical formula for creating a pleasing composition. In here, the way the ripples come in, they take your eye up to the trees. You follow the trees up to the top of the mountains, follow the mountains around towards the dock building. You've almost got a Fibonacci spiral there. So it's just, once you know it, you'll start to see it in a lot of places. You'll see it in seashells, cauliflower. It's a way that nature grows in a lot of ways that's mathematical. Trees, yep. It's a very cool thing, but, and then in this version here, I just darkened the bottom. Once everything was dry, I glazed sort of from the middle of the water down to darken that area and sort of soften some of those directionals. But I just felt that it's nice in a landscape scene specifically, but even in almost any kind of painting, if you have darkness around your edges that sort of push your eyes into the scene, it can be a helpful way of directing your viewer into where you want them to look. I mentioned in the PDF that I sent, this is kind of the roadmap that I'll follow. I thought it'd be helpful for you all to have this, so you can kind of go over it on your own time. If you have any questions about it, just let me know. Kind of gone over the first part of the composition. On the simplification, in the original photo, there's a lot of docks in the background. And I just thought they kind of cluttered the area at the point, so I just eliminated all those. They're not necessary to tell this story. So that's sort of one of the simplifications. The original scene itself is pretty simplified already. I've kind of zoomed in, eliminating some of the shoreline, the rocks in the foreground, and those kinds of things. I just focused on what was really important to the scene in my view. But being that building there. I've mentioned it before, Bruce has probably mentioned it. It's squinting when you're looking at a scene, even if it's a still life and you're trying to figure out where the lights and darks are, squint your eyes and look at it, and it will simplify, get rid of texture, and you will be able to more easily see the light and shadow. But squinting is one of those things that eliminates details and textures. So when you're looking at a scene, it can just simplify everything for you, and it sort of blurs it out and makes it easier to kind of focus on what's really important in the scene without all the extra stuff. In the drawing, like I mentioned in the PDF, it's really just about getting enough of a drawing down so you're not getting lost while you're painting it. Let's see. And the reason I did two different photos, one with the horizon that's up in the top third and one that's in the low third, it's a preference for whichever you want to paint. I'll guide you through whichever one you want to do, but I will say that the water reflections, doing something like this, is a much more involved process. There's more steps to painting water effectively and showing light on water than there is doing a kind of an interesting sky. But whichever one you want to do is fine. I just thought it'd be nice to give you guys the choice to explore whichever one you want. Since I painted this one, I'm going to go ahead and do the other version for the demo. And I don't know if you all have ever seen one of the tricks I learned from a carpenter, actually, I think probably on this old house. If you want to draw a straight line across a piece of paper, put your finger on the edge of your paper and then keep your pencil straight and just drag your hand right across, keeping your finger on that edge. And that'll give you a pretty straight line. I don't need it to be a lot, it's very faint. But I know that I want the hut or this boat building to be in this area. I'm gonna have the ground over here with the trees. Very basic, just kind of that shape. I'm not gonna draw the mountains. I'm gonna put them in wet and wet. And you can see that's what I did here, but I drew the line in kind of dark, so you can still see that pencil line. So I'm not gonna put the pencil line in, I'm just gonna eyeball it when I paint it. That way the line won't be distracting. But putting the mountains in wet and wet gives a nice soft edge to them, and they just kind of blend into the background. It's pushing the depth in the scene. It's creating more aerial perspective by sort of implying that there's more air between us and these background mountains which just hopefully has the effect of pushing them into the background and really letting the focal point come forward. So the dock is going to go right through here. I'll put, and then the building is basic. Let's see. It's just kind of some basic perspective here. And I can show you that on this board as well. And I'll turn my laptop so that Melissa and Sheila can see the screen as well. But there's just a little bit of perspective on this building. Essentially, if you have the horizon sort of down here where this line is, the horizon in the painting is actually going to be right through here. I don't want it to be, it'll create a tangent if I put the horizon right here, because that horizon is kind of going to be where the mountains and the water meet, right through there. I also don't want it to be up here where this roof line is. That'll be another tangent. And a tangent is just, it creates kind of a point of conflict when you have two elements that butt up against each other in a weird way. So I don't want that line of the horizon to go there or there or there. So I'm going to put it right through the building, under the roof line and above the dock. One of the things that is important in this scene to me is this little window. So I want to make sure to keep that highlight. I'll put a little thing there. I really don't need to put all the pylons in or anything like that. I'm just going to put a little line here that shows how far down I want them to go. And again, I'm running my hand across this edge to keep a nice straight line. Something like that. So I'll know that the pylons that are in the front of this building are going to go to that point. And then the reflections will go down from there. It just gives me a little bit of visual reference to use. I'm not going to put any land over here. It's just going to be the ripples in the water. And the shape that I'm going for with these ripples is kind of, I sort of want, there's going to be a shadow under this dock. And where that shadow is, I want some of these lines to come out and sort of come back this way. And in perspective, they're going to be, because this is closer to us and this is further away, these lines are going to radiate. Because there's going to be a vanishing point somewhere along the horizon where all of these will actually connect. But for this scene, I really kind of just want.
That concept's really important when you're painting waves from the shore.
It is.
Streams. Yeah.
Because they're going to be parallel. But when you're looking at them, they're going to, like a railroad track, they're going to look like they come together all the way at the distance. But they don't, they're parallel. It's just that perspective that you're seeing. So these lines are going to do the same thing. They're going to look like they come together or they get closer together in the distance. But they're really not.
Devin, I know you don't want to. I know you want to keep it light, but the projector isn't showing any of your lightweight lines. So we really.
Oh, there it is.
Oh, that's a little better.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, really, the only important lines are, in my mind, the horizon line, which is that line there, the lines for this building, and the dock. Everything else, I'm just going to kind of eyeball. So I know that the mountains, like, for example, when I put the mountains in, I want to make sure that they don't go right to the middle point of this painting. So I'm going to make them go either a little bit higher or a little bit lower. Same with the trees. I'll make sure that they're going above that center line. But so can you see the perspective lines here, the ripples?
Okay,
and they
now I
just
can.
fan out as they get closer to you. Because as you get closer to the background, they're going to get more and more flat. They will be horizontal the further back they go.
Okay, and what you're doing a loop like this, where are you starting those out? I mean, where is this? Because that's not what's on the picture, so.
No, correct. It's pretty much where the shadow for the dock is going to be, which is going to be just right in there. I want these to connect because it's nice when you're painting a scene, regardless of what it is, a still life or a landscape or a cityscape or a skyscape. it's nice if you have elements that connect. And so one of the things I want to do is, because there's going to be a shadow under this dock that's going to connect all the pylons, which are connected to the dock, which are connected to the building. I'm going to make that shadow, when it goes across under the dock, connect into these ripples. So they will sort of fade back and then go right into that shadow line under the dock. So all of that will be connected. So with skies, I like to use verditer blue, and I like a little carmine or a little yellow ochre to warm up near the horizon.
Is the paper dry? Are you doing it now?
Yes, I'm going to paint this wet on dry. So that the paper will be dry, but
Okay.
once I start painting it, it's going to be wet, and then I'll go back in while it's wet and add a little bit more.
We're doing now. Maybe I'll try.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
I'm using verditer blue, which is it's actually a Holbein color, but it has a little bit of white in it. It's a semi-opaque. But you can use cobalt blue, manganese blue, even ultramarine blue. You know, typically for a sky, you want to have a darker blue at the top. If you're doing a blue sky, darker blue at the top, and it's going to grade, it's going to fade out to a lighter blue or as you go further down towards the horizon. And I'll show you that as I do this here.
And then some yellow and some red, right?
Yes, yeah, you can add, a lot of times you'll see when you look at the sky, the sky towards the horizon tends to be warmer than the sky further up you go. So you can have a dark blue at the top, and it can fade down towards like a yellow ochre shade or a red shade. I think carmine for the red shade, which is what I used in these. It's just a very subtle warmth. It's almost hard to see in there, but you can see it more in that one. But just adds a little bit of warmth to the sky. And with something like this, that's, you know, a lot of sky, distant mountains are going to be kind of cool in color. The water's going to be cool in color. It's nice to have some warmth in it. And so I put a little bit of carmine in the sky, a little bit of carmine in the reflections, just to try and warm it up a little.
What's a big reflection there?
One of the things I like to do, I'm going to work mostly dry here. I'm going to spritz some of the sky, just lightly to give you a little bit of extra working time here.
Okay.
But this is going to be big brush strokes across the page. I want to put a little bit of, like in that reference photo, there's got some cloud interest in there. And so you'll notice that that cloud has an angled line to it, which is also a nice directional. It's going to direct the viewer's eye through the scene this way, which is nice, versus just having straight across, which is kind of dull. But putting a little bit of a directionality into it is nice. But since that's a white cloud, I'm going to paint around it. So we're going to start blue at the top. I'll go ahead and throw a little cobalt in the top, just to darken that up a little. But back to the verditer, and I'm going to put in a little cloud through here. There's some clouds that way.
Devin, I'm sorry, what color blue did you use for that?
I'm using verditer blue, but
Okay,
you can use any cobalt blue, manganese blue.
okay,
You don't even have to use blue. If you want to paint a yellow sky with purple
Okay.
clouds, that can work. But
right.
for this, I'm just going to use the blue. But I like verditer blue. It has a little bit of white in it. It's a semi-opaque color.
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
Could you spell that? I can't
Oh,
understand.
sure. Verditer. I might have.
That's what I haven't heard.
I might have brought it. You can use ultramarine. It's a very dark, it tends to be a darker, warmer blue. So that could be good for the top part of the sky. Actually,
They got them in order. Who knows that?
yeah, there's. So that is what the vertical blue looks like. Is that what verditer is? Okay. And it's just that I love the shade for the sky. For me, it looks right. I'm going to come through here. So I'm just adding some cloud shapes, very loose, bold brush strokes. I'm trying to get rid of some of the sparkle along the edge so that the eye is not stuck on that. And a little more cobalt at the top. And then what I'll do too, I'm sorry? A little bit of cobalt on top, just to darken up the top a little bit. And I'm going to come in with a wet brush and hit some of these edges and just soften some of this. This is all very sort of fast and loose. I like that. And then I'm going to softening this edge here. And since it's wet, I can still come in here, add a little bit. But now I'm at the point where I'm going to start putting these background mountains in. I want to make them a little richer, just to distinguish them from the sky in the background.
Down is blue.
I'm working with a little leftover sepia and indigo. It's in my palette from the previous versions of the painting. I'm just kind of eyeballing here where I want that top part of the mountains to be, making sure I'm not putting them right in the middle, trying to keep them a little bit above that center line or below it, but not right on it. And it's okay if it starts above and then goes below that center line, but you just don't want anything to rest right on that center line. You can see everything's kind of softening out the top part there where it's reaching the wet sky. And essentially when you have these background mountains, they'll just be a cooler, neutralized color the further back they go. And because I want to keep color harmony here, I'm using the same color in that mix that I used in the sky. It's kind of important, if you can, to don't use too many colors in your painting. You can start to get a little overwhelmed with the different colors and lose your harmony. Whereas if you kind of keep the same base 3 or 4 colors and use those to mix the other colors you need, everything you're painting is kind of going to fit and be harmonious. As I paint these mountains, I'm just keeping in mind that a lot of times in these landscapes, when a mountain starts to get closer to the ground, or you'll often see like a haze down on the lower portion, and I'm just trying to add a little bit of that into this background row of mountains. Just trying to control the value, being careful to paint around this building on the dock here. I have that window that I want to make sure I maintain that highlight. And that's part of the process of doing this first wash, is you're laying in all the lightest values for everything and saving your whites. So I have some whites that I'm saving in the clouds and the sky. There's a little highlight that I want to save on that building where the window is. And then I want to maintain some sparkle in the water. And so I will allow the texture of the paper to help me with that and getting some dry brush. And in this part here, oftentimes in the sky, as you get closer to the horizon, you'll see some warmth in the clouds, whether it's kind of a reddish or pinkish hue or a purplish hue or a yellowish hue. A lot of times you'll see people paint with yellow ochre or raw sienna. I've used carmine here, which is a kind of a pinkish red. It's not a fire engine red or an apple red. It's a more of a pink color. It's closer to a magenta than a deep red. Deep red, you can use it to mix nice purples in the sky, but it can be a little bit too much. And I want something that's very subtle here. And I'll use that same carmine color in the water when I'm doing the reflections. And I like the softness that I've got here, the way everything is kind of blended together. where the trees are going to be on the right-hand side, they're going to be dark enough. I don't need to worry about painting the mountains behind them. I'm actually going to leave the white of the paper there so that I can maintain some contrast. In the hut here, the hut's going to be, or the boat building on the dock is going to be a dark color. So I don't need to save those whites, but I want to make sure I save that white highlight in the window. And so the blue of the mountains can creep over the lines of the building a little bit. I'm not concerned about that, but I'm not going to paint through the building just so that I maintain some highlight. If I want to separate the roof a little bit from the background hills, I'll have some flexibility to do that. And as I'm working my way down, I want to keep some light in the center of the scene there, kind of in the farthest back point of the water. And then I'll gradually get it darker as I go down towards the bottom of the page. But I'll start with a light value. And again, this step is all just about light values. You can add some medium values and dark values if you want to work while it's wet and get those softer lost and found edges. But for the most part, this scene is going to be just light values in this first step. You can see some of the dry brush texture there. I'm using rough paper. Rough and cold pressed paper will work well for this when you're working, trying to get a dry brush effect. Hot pressed paper is very smooth, and so it's a little more difficult to get that kind of effect. But part of the trick is just moving the brush quickly across the paper very lightly, and it'll skip across the texture of the paper, giving you that dry brush effect, which in this case kind of looks like sparkle, light reflecting on the water, which is what we're going for here. And because that's a visually interesting thing, and you'll have little sparkles and sharp edges there and some contrast, I want to keep that in the center of the painting and kind of back near the focal point, not near the edges of the painting. They can be distracting if you get those kinds of things happening down at the corners or near the top, bottom, or sides of the painting. And so I have a little bit of that darker mix from the background mountains that have worked into my blue here, but that's all right because this will be a multi-stage layering process to keep some definition and some softness in the water. It's nice to have that contrast. But at this point, it's really just about putting that light value in, which is going to be the most kind of the background color that you'll see in the water. And then everything will just build up darker colors on top of that to add more definition and form. I'm taking some of the water out of my brush here by touching a paper towel to the ferrule end of the bristles, which will pull moisture out and leave the pigment in. And at this point, I want to make sure I don't have too much water in my brush because that will create blooms in this area. But this is the part where I wanted to add a little bit more of the carmine from the sky reflecting in the water. And so just in parts. And I'm going to go ahead and use that to kind of define some of these ripples here. But again, that'll be painted over, so it's not terribly important at this point. It's almost just kind of a reference for me for later, but it can come through, some of these colors can come through the later layers. So it's nice to have a little bit of variation in there. And at this point, it's pretty much the first wash done. We have what we want in the sky, a little bit of visual interest, soft mountains that hopefully push them into the background, some sparkle in the water, some highlights that are coming through, a little visual interest with the ripples, which are also creating directionals. The warmth in there creates nice contrast. I'll probably go back into these clouds a little bit later on and just add maybe a little bit of shadow color. We'll see how it looks when the rest of the painting is done. It can be hard to judge those kinds of things at this stage of the process. It'll become more obvious as we add more mid and dark values. And I like to try and keep my workspace a little clean so I don't spread paint everywhere without realizing it. But at this point, the painting is pretty much in the ugly stage. There's not a lot going on. It can be kind of hard to tell what we're going to be looking at as we progress. But this is part about trusting the process. This stage, like I said, is all about saving the whites and getting light values in, and we'll build on top of it further down the road.